Good evening. I mean, I hadn't even started, John. I'm just playing. So anyway, getting into tonight's lesson, Isaiah chapter 10. No, Siri, I don't want to talk to you right now. If I can get my tablet to open, we'll be in Isaiah chapter 10. There we go. So, as we're getting into Isaiah chapter 10, I want us to keep in mind that throughout all of this, there is some back and forth, okay? So at one minute, he's talking to Judah and Jerusalem. The next minute, he's talking to Israel. And so tonight, I want you to keep this in mind. When we talk about the judgment of Assyria, he's talking about the nation of Israel. When we're talking about the judgment coming from Babylon, he's talking about the nation of Judah, okay? Assyria is going to come in 722 BC, and they're going to take Israel into captivity. That was the Assyrian judgment. God using the Assyrian army to come in, take Israel, the 10 tribes to the north, into captivity. Assyria would march all the way through Judah, and they would get right to the gates of Jerusalem and be stopped. Okay, that's where Isaiah 37, 38, 39 come into play. Babylon would come in a couple hundred years later in 586. Now, the siege would begin prior to that, but 586 BC, Babylon's going to come in and they're going to take the nation of Judah into captivity. The promise to Judah was you would be in captivity for 70 years and God would deliver you. That's where you get into the books of Zechariah and Malachi and all that. Or Haggai, Zechariah, and all those books coming together. Israel does not get such promise. They don't. The 10 tribes to the north do not get that promise, and we're going to understand why. Hopefully, we'll understand why this evening, because that's what we're going to deal with in Isaiah chapter 10. God is going to reveal through Isaiah, and I want you to stay with me, because in my mind, this is still future to come. This is not happening in Isaiah chapter 10. This is God revealing to Isaiah what is coming for them, because you still have Assyria bringing a siege all the way into Isaiah 37, all the way into Isaiah 37. They're going to march, again, that's where they march up to the gates of Jerusalem. So keep that in mind as we get into this lesson tonight. But I've titled the lesson, God's Belt. And the reason I've titled it God's Belt is the worst fear that I ever felt was the day that my daddy pulled off his belt to give me a whipping. Because I can hear the belt going through the loops. And a belt that just sits over on the dresser or a belt that just hangs on the wall, there's nothing wrong with that belt, is it? Can't be used. But now when you put that belt in your daddy's hand, what can it be used for? There's punishment. My daddy would use it, he didn't use it often, but he did use it. And there was one time he no longer used a belt on my sister. And see, I sound like a redneck joke coming with this, but it's actually a true story. We all got whipped. And he went down the line. My older sister got it, my older brother got it, then I got it, and then my other sister, it was her turn. And he reared that belt back and he swung and got her on the bottom, and she just stared at him. And he reared back, he did it again. And she just stared at him again. Needless to say, he was scared to death at that point, my sister at that point. So, but either way, I want you to get the picture tonight that God's going to use an instrument that if you just leave it sitting there, it won't do anything until somebody picks it up. Like I said, a belt is just a belt. You can wrap it around your waist. You can wear it to hold up your trousers until you use it for something other than that. Assyria was a nation that God's people thought they could just say, we don't have to worry about them. God's got a different plan for them. We wonder why. And when you get to Malachi chapter 6, in verse 8, God said, He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Israel forgot that. Judah forgot that. But the character and nature of God has not, nor will it change. And when God moves in judgment, He's doing it to get our attention. He wants us to look toward Him. In this case, He's looking to Judah and He's looking to Israel and said, hey, I'm right here. You need to be doing something to get back to me, to get back in the direction that I want you to go. But from the beginning, the idea that Jesus gave us in Matthew chapter 7, He said, treat others the way that we want to be treated. It rings throughout the ages, doesn't it? It's been there from the beginning. The results of not doing that and only seeking one's self-gratification is means for punishment. And that was where Judah and Israel had gotten. In this case, in chapter 10, Israel has gotten to a point where they only wanted to gratify themselves. And God said, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. But if Israel needed a prophet to go to bat for them, like Habakkuk went to bat for Judah, here would be the time. Isaiah is going to tell them what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. And yet they're still not going to listen. What it means is that their fate was sealed. It's what it meant with Habakkuk, isn't it? It's what God told Habakkuk. Habakkuk would argue with God, you're surely not going to send this wicked and evil nation against Judah, are you? And God would said, you calling them wicked, look what my people are doing. So their fate was sealed. Israel's fate was sealed. And for those that continue to live in sin today, the message is true, your fate's sealed. If you continue to live in sin. And that's how chapter 10 begins. You think there's a couple of things that needs to be pointed out. In the first 4 verses, you find the reason for punishment. It's a continuation from Isaiah chapter 9. Verses 5 through 11, we see the rod of choice. Verses 12 through 19, you see the rod's reality check, because the instrument God uses needs a reality check. And verses 20 through 27, we see the remaining remnant, or 26, excuse me. And then verses 27 through 34, we see the rod's end, or the instrument's end, by the time we finish this chapter. And so I want you to look at the first 4 verses. Let's talk about the reason for punishment. Again, it's just a continuation from chapter 9 into chapter 10. He said, woe to those who enact evil statutes, and to those who constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice and rob the poor of my people of their rights, so that widows may be their spoil, and that they may plunder the orphans. Now what will you do in the day of punishment, and in the devastation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help, and where will you leave your wealth? Nothing remains but to crouch among the captives or fall among the slain. In spite of all this, His anger does not turn away, and His hand is still stretched out. So you think, you go back again, the laundry list is there of what the nation of Israel has done. And again, chapter 9 carrying over into chapter 10. Chapter 9, verse 9, asserting pride and arrogance of their heart. That's what Israel has done. Verse 15 of chapter 9, leaders leading people astray when they should have been leading them to God. Verse 19 of chapter 9, every man only looks out for himself instead of looking out for each other. And the same phrase is carried over into chapter 10 as well, from chapter 9, verses 8 through 22. In spite of all of this, His anger does not turn away, and His hand is still stretched out. Now, I made a comment last week when we were here about God's hand being stretched out, and I think I may have brought some confusion in that. So, when you think of God's hand being on them, it means what? He's punishing them. The punishment is there. His hand is stretched out. He is sending the judgment upon them at this point in time. He's not finished. It's not over. His hand's still there is what He's saying. He said, until I'm done, my hand's still going to be upon you. It's going to be pressing down upon them. And so He's still not done with Israel. He's not talking to Judah right now. He's addressing Jacob, Israel, at this point in time. He said they enact evil statutes. They're unjust. They deprive the needy of justice. They rob the poor of their rights. Widows have become their slaves, and they plunder the orphans. And all the things that he listed from chapter 9, verse 8 to chapter 10, verse 2, everything they were commanded to do as God's people, what has he said? You've neglected it. Everything in my law that I commanded you to do, you've spit at it. And you've chose to do something totally different. You've chose to do things your own way. That doesn't end well when it comes to God, does it? Not when we decide to do it our own way. It didn't end well for Judah. Why? God's going to look at Judah and say, you watched what they did and you were worse than they were because you saw what I did to them and you didn't change. What does that say for us today? When we have both accounts in front of us and we can read it and understand it, and people still don't change. Here's the thing, church. It hasn't ended today. Jesus would rebuke the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the lawyers because of this very thing in Matthew 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, he would say. Woe to you lawyers too, even when the lawyer's like, hey, you condemn us with them. He's like, yeah, because you do the same thing they do. But they were abusing God's people, their own brothers and sisters. The very people that they should have been taking care of, they're abusing them. They were targeting the poor and the helpless, those who couldn't defend themselves. Does God have a right to be mad? Does he have a right to be angry? Yeah. They're his people. He said, now what? Now what you going to do? That's the idea from verse 3. Now what you going to do about it? Because punishment's coming. I can't help but hear the song from Cops. Y'all ever watch the show Cops? Bad boys, what you gonna do? That's what I hear when I think of this. Because that's what I see God say. What are you gonna do now? Because you're not gonna escape. The same question is asked by somebody when somebody that's bigger than you is gonna beat you up. You think it's what the guy who looked out for the ones that were bullied? It's what he would say to the bully. Especially if he was bigger than the bully, isn't it? He would look at him right before he pulverized him and he'd say, what you going to do? That's the idea. God said, you did all of this. You did all of these things. And he looked at him and said, what you want to do about it? You think you're going to escape punishment? He said, you can't run to the other nations. It ain't going to happen. They can't save you. He said, what you going to do with all your money? He said, you can't buy your way out of this. It ain't going to do you no good. It's going to be destroyed right along with you. Your only hope, he says, is to crouch down behind the dead bodies and hide or fall with them. That's it. Because he says, I'm fed up. That's how you know God is sick and tired. But still, with that, he said his anger is still not spent. And his hand is still stretched out. He's still not done. Still hasn't done. So he says, this is what I'm going to do. Look at verses 5 through. The rod of my anger and the staff in whose hands is my indignation. I send it against a godless nation and commission it against the people of my fury, to capture the booty and to seize plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets. Yet it does not so intend, nor does it plan so in its heart, but rather it is its purpose to destroy and to cut off many nations. For it says, are not my princes all kings? Is not Calno like Carchemish, or Hamath like Arpad, or Samaria like Damascus? As my hand has reached to the kingdoms of the idols whose graven images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria, shall I not do to Jerusalem and her images just as I have done to Samaria and her idols? He's arrogant, ain't he? But he's the rod of God's choice. Assyria. The idea, when you think that first word there in verse 5 says, woe, you would think judgment's going to be, that's not what he's doing there. This is a call. Richard Rogers, he would put it this way. He says, it's not really, woe, Assyria, it's ho, Assyria. Come, Assyria. That's what God is saying at this point in time. Move at this point. God's calling them, and he said, they're the rod of my anger. They're the staff in whose hand is my indignation. It's God moving at this time. Remember that belt? This is the belt. Who has it in his hand? God does. Who can whip you? God can. Who can whip them? God can. It can't whip you by itself. And that's where their downfall is going to come in, because they think they can. Who controls it? God does. All the answers lead back to God. God says, I'm the one who sent it. He said, I send it against a godless nation. Now, they were God's people, weren't they? Can you be considered to everybody else God's people and God look at you and say you're a godless nation? Is that not a message? He said, I'm sending it against the people of my fury. He said, they're going to go in and capture the spoils. They're going to plunder the nations. There's a plurality for a reason, because Assyria, when they would go in, they wouldn't just go to one nation. They would go to one nation after another nation after another nation after another nation. And that's why they could boast, and they would boast by the time, like what we said there at the end of that. But I'll get there in just a second. But he said, they are coming to trample you down like mud in the streets. He said, they're going to humiliate you. You think your army's big? Just watch. Watch what this nation can do to you, because they're going to bring you down. Don't lose sight of who's behind it, guys. Who's behind this? God is. God is moving Assyria into place. For the groups that go out there and say, God will never do that, God would never destroy his people, be careful, because they're not reading their Bible. They're not reading the same Bible that I'm reading anyway. For those that claim that God is only a God of love and he's only a God of peace, they're not reading their Bible. Is he a God of love? Yeah. Is he a God of peace? Yes, he is. But he's also a God who will bring his wrath and judgment upon those who refuse to do as he's commanded. God maneuvers them into place. You think about a general moving his people on a battlefield. That's what God's doing with Assyria at this point in time. This isn't what Assyria intended to do. He says that's not what they intended to do, but they're going to do his purpose. They're going to do his plan. They're going to do God's will, whether they want to or not. The plan of Assyria was different than God's plan. They had one purpose, though, God says. Their purpose is to destroy. Destroy. There's another being with that same mentality, isn't there? He's out there. We fight him today. Satan has that same mentality, doesn't destroy. But you listen to their arrogance. Their downfall begins right here. Assyria's downfall begins right here. Are not all my princes kings? He said the king of Assyria boasted in the fact, and he truly believed by his own power he conquered cities like Calno. He conquered cities like Carchemish. He conquered cities like Hamath and Arpad. He would conquer Samaria. He would conquer Damascus. But he would meet his match when he decided to go too far and try to go after Jerusalem. Assyria seemed impossible to stop to everybody else, but not to God. Not to God. We'll get there in just a minute. To this point, though, he had been unstoppable. And that's for a reason. You got to go back to verses 5 and 6 and you understand why he was unstoppable. Who made Assyria unstoppable? God did. God did. Assyria said, my hand has reached into the kingdoms of the idols whose graven images were greater than those of Jerusalem and Samaria. Every nation they went against had their own God. And guess what he said? Matter of fact, Rabshakeh is going to read that in a letter when he goes up again, when he's at the gates of Jerusalem. He's going to read it out loud. Has any God stopped me before? That's what the king of Assyria is going to say, isn't it? Has anybody stopped me? Has any other God stopped? No, they hadn't. Assyria didn't recognize Jehovah. Assyria thought God was no different than any other nation's idols that was out there. No different. So you think about what all of that meant, and when it comes back to this, and understanding they didn't care. Assyria they didn't recognize nor did they know who God was. And so in the mind of the king, I'll destroy Jerusalem and I'll destroy Samaria just like I destroyed every other nation. I ain't got to worry about them. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. Right? Take care in thinking that you or I have accomplished anything, because God gives you a reality check real quick, real fast. I learned that the hard way last year. And that's what it takes sometimes, isn't it? It's what it takes sometimes for the Christian too, isn't it? A reality check that you and I aren't anything without God. And that's what God's going to do for him. Look at verse 12. He said, "So it will be when the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem. He will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the pomp of his haughtiness. For he has said, by the power of my hand, by my wisdom I did this. For I have understanding and have removed the boundaries of the peoples, and plundered their treasures. And like a mighty man, I brought down their inhabitants. And my hand reached to the riches of the peoples like a nest. And as one gathers abandoned eggs, I gathered all the earth. And there was not one that flapped its wing or opened its beak or chirped. Is the axe to boast of itself? Let me stop there, verse 14. Let's stop at verse 14 there for a minute. The reality check, you don't exceed God's will. You don't exceed God's plan, and you don't exceed God's purpose. When God said, I've set a limit, that's his limit. You can't go past it. Learn not to exceed what is written. Right? And I'm going to make a point here in a minute. I understand. Okay. Paul says something like that to those who choose to add to God's word. John's going to say something similar toward the end of Revelation. Whoever adds to this book or takes away from it, God will add to him the things that are written in it. Now, I got it. Those are specific books, and yes, I took them out of context, but I'm using it to prove a point here for a minute. Okay? Because God, from the beginning, has told you not to add to anything. You can take the same principle and add it, can't you? We can. And I say that not to take the scripture out of context, but I want you to get the idea that God doesn't like it when we try to do things our own way and try to make it up or be the way that we want it to be. Did I say that right? I think I said that right. Needless to say, don't take matters into your own hands. Don't do something that you think is right at the end of the day, because what you think is right doesn't matter to God. What God thinks is right is what matters. And that's what happens when we allow our own pride and our own arrogance to get in the way. What happened with Assyria? Their pride and their arrogance got in the way. Ain't no God stopped me before is what they would say. What they would boast. I've destroyed all of these things. I have done this. I have done that. Y'all hear the similarity there? It's not you. When God is through using Assyria, he's going to punish them. That's going to come next. That's what he's saying here. He said his haughtiness and his arrogance is the reason he will be punished. Because we forget how powerful Assyria was. We don't get that because we have all this new technology and all these weapons in our day today, in our time today. But you think about, Assyria was a trained army who was trained in war and battle maneuvers. Very advanced. Assyria had iron weapons, where everybody else was still using bow and arrows. They're using iron weapons. They were trained in how to be cruel. You want to go look up some of the things the Assyrian army would do when they would go in and take a nation into captivity. They would introduce punishments such as impaling and beheading and flaying their captives. They were proficient at it. They were messed up, mentally messed up in my mind. But they did everything their own way. That was their mindset. This is how we're going to do it. The question God raises in verse 15, that's why I wanted to stop there, because you see you read verses 13 through 14, and you see everything that they boasted about. You see everything that they thought that they had done. And sure, they had done it, but who allowed them to do it? God did. And then verse 15, he said, is the axe to boast itself over the one who chops with it? Is the saw to exalt itself over the one who wields it? That would be like a club wielding those who lift it, or like a rod lifting him who is not wood. Therefore the Lord, the God of hosts, will send a wasting disease among his stout warriors, and under his glory a fire will be kindled like a burning flame. And the light of Israel will become a fire, and his Holy One a flame, and it will burn and devour his his thorns and his briars in a single day. And he will destroy the glory of his forest, and of his fruitful garden, both soul and body. And it will be as when a sick man wastes away. And the rest of the trees of his forest will be so small in number that a child could write them down. You think about what he's saying there. Is the axe to boast of itself? Or the one who chops with it? Or over itself, the one who chops with it? And he would go through there and he would give you some analogies to compare it to. And at the end of the day, the axe can't do anything unless somebody picks it up and uses it, right? The saw can't do anything unless somebody picks it up and uses it. The club can't do anything unless somebody picks it up to use it. That's the idea. But yet, what he's saying here is the axe that I'm using, Assyria, thinks that they're the ones that are doing this. They're the ones behind it. Again, a belt that stays wrapped around the waist is no harm until somebody unwraps it from around their waist. That's the point. Assyria boasting that they did this and that they do that, but God's the one holding the axe. God's the one who's got his hand there. That's the message for us, isn't it? What are we without God? Nothing. Nothing. Where did their power come from? God. Who can take it away? God. If it were not for God, Assyria would be nothing. He raises up kings, he raises up nations, and he brings them down. Doesn't Paul say something like that in the book of Romans, chapter 13, verse 1? Yeah. The people in positions of power are there because God put them there, not because of you or I. God says, you think you're something. You think you got all this because you got this great big army. He said, watch this. He said, I'm going to send a wasting disease amongst your best soldiers. I like the New Century Translation of verses 17 through 19. I want to read it for you. He said, God, the light of Israel, will be like a fire. The Holy One will be like a flame. He will be like a fire that suddenly burns the weeds and thorns. The fire burns away the great trees and farmlands, destroying everything in it. Destroying everything, it will be like a sick person who wastes away. The trees left standing will be so few that a child could count them. He said, your big army that you think is something, he said, that ain't nothing compared to what I can do. Because I can set a fire and it's gone. As a matter of fact, that happened. When you go back and you read the story of Assyria's fall and how Assyria fell, you understand what God meant, and that God meant business when he talked about this in Isaiah chapter 10. It started with the defeat of Sennacherib's army in Isaiah 39. As a matter of fact, scholars go back to that and still can't figure out how Sennacherib's army, 185,000 soldiers, fell that day. They still can't figure it out. But they say it began there. Assyria's fall began at that moment. Interesting, isn't it? From that point, there was an extension of internal strife and a powerful coalition among the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Scythians that eventually sacked the capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. That's when Assyria finally was taken down. But again, it all started with God destroying 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Why? Because of pride and arrogance and exceeding God's plan and purpose for them. Isn't that interesting? The nation that was once great and powerful, he said, there's going to be so few of you left that a child that can only write up to a certain amount of numbers, that's how many you're going to have left. And I think of that maybe 8, I'm just playing, maybe 9. The whole point of all of it, don't exceed God's plan and don't exceed God's purpose. Because when you do, he's going to make you pay. That's the idea. So you see all of this judgment coming in. You see all of the destruction coming in. You see the first part from chapter 9 to chapter 10, you see the judgment upon Israel itself. And you see who it is that's bringing that judgment in the first part of chapter 10. And then you get into the middle of chapter 10, and we understand that God's not going to allow it to go on forever. They're going to be punished. And he's going to take care of the ones that brought in the punishment against them. Why? Because they exceeded what was the purpose and the plan for them. But he's got to give you some relief. And he's going to do that. And next week we come back together, he's going to give you that relief. In the rest of the chapter, you're going to see, at the end of the day, there's still a remnant. Not everybody that was in Israel was completely wiped out. There were people left over. And we'll understand more about that the next time we're together. But that's why I remind you, Judah was given a time length. Israel was not. But there will be survivors. But what it shows me is still God has compassion. God still shows mercy. And God's still there for those that truly long for him. Will punishment come to those who reject his commands? Yes. Will punishment come to those who refuse to obey? Yes. Will God do whatever God needs to do to try to get you back in his direction? Yes, he will. But you got to make a choice. Get back in his direction. So this evening, if you're not going in the direction of God, there's one way to get in that direction. His name is Jesus. Put him on this evening. Step out on your faith and confess him before men. Repent of your sins. Be baptized for the forgiveness of those sins. Make determination you're not going to live that sinful life anymore. Be baptized for the forgiveness of those sins and raised to walk in the newness of life. You can have that opportunity right now amongst all of us. If you are a child of God, maybe you're struggling with sin. Maybe you've gone off the path. Get back on it this evening. If you need the prayers to help you get there, we'll pray with you. But take this time that you have the opportunity to do so as we stand together and we sing.